So this lecture will focus on basically two issues. One is the connection of food to consciousness, and the other is what exactly healthy food entails. Many of us have dealt with the subject of healthy food, and we all know what healthy food should be. It should be natural. The nutrients should not be removed by over-processing, radiation, genetic manipulation, etc. What bodhisattva is not so clear, perhaps. I think that Elizabeth Clare Prophet has given us a very good definition of that bodhi is the state of being awake, of being aware in a world where most people are asleep. And sattva is the seeker of the awake state. And so we'll see how food helps us to become more awake in this sleeping world. I was always very much impressed by the repeated references of the Ascended Masters to the connection between food and health. Having been interested in spiritual matters for many years, I was always a bit depressed by the fact that no spiritual teachers really understood this subject. When I encountered Elizabeth Clare Prophet, I first was very much impressed by her knowledge and her connection to what I felt was pure truth, and also that she was the first spiritual teacher I encountered who really understood the subject of food as it pertains to spiritual growth. One of the most basic issues is that we live longer when we're healthy. Each day we have a unique opportunity to balance karma. And a person who is ripped out of his life at the age of 50 with a heart attack has maybe 30 or 40 years with 365 days per year less chance to balance karma. So I found it very interesting when I attended the Easter conference of 1993 with a powerful dictation by the Elohim Hercules, in which he pointed out that you make karma when you abuse your physical health because you are interfering with God's plan. He pointed out that this karmic responsibility is very serious and may be the reason for reincarnating to deal with the consequences of neglect during life. He pointed out that food is a very important part of karmic progress. So after this powerful dictation, I was speaking to Elizabeth Clare Prophet and told her that I was amazed that an Elohim would bring the subject down to the food we eat every day. And she said, well, it's quite simple, really. The Elohim are the creators of form, and food creates our form. So obviously, the Elohim will be interested in food. I thought, sure, makes sense. Elizabeth Clare Prophet also pointed out that an important part of the Bodhisattva tradition was virya. Now, the subject of virya is not very commonly discussed in spiritual matters, but the original path of the Bodhisattva was virya, which is vibrant physical health. Vibrant physical health. This was not emphasized in those early days because there existed no Coca-Cola, no ice cream, no chocolate, no fast food, no hydrogenated fats, because natural food was all anyone had. There were no machines to prevent us from working actively with our bodies every day. So the original teachings of Virya as a basis for our path of the Bodhisattva was not in any way particularly important to dwell on. In our day, it's very important. If you follow the news as I do, you may have been impressed by a recent statement by the medical health authorities in the U.S. that in 45 years from now, 1/3 of the U.S. population will be diabetic. Now, let's just stop for a second and think about what that means. What is the life of a diabetic? It is reduced health, longer recovery time from illness, much increased chance of amputations, 3 times the likelihood of a heart attack. Insulin does not reduce those risks. What insulin does is it reduces greatly the risk that you will die tomorrow of a diabetic coma, and that's great. But as we dwell on the subject of terrorism as a threat to our Western society, we should not lose sight of the fact that a health crisis is creeping up on us, which is at least as dangerous as the terrorist threat. Because a country with 1/3 diabetics will be in trouble, because that's only one problem of many. If you've been following the events of the last few weeks, you know that Ronald Reagan has been a lot in the news. Ronald Reagan was a highly intelligent man, regarded as one of the really remarkable presidents, and yet he finished his life in his last years with Alzheimer's, not recognizing anyone, not knowing where he was. How is this possible? Well, Reagan was well known as a great fan of jelly beans. He always, in the Oval Office, there was a jar this large. I saw a documentary once, A Working Day with Ronald Reagan, shown back in the early 80s. He ate them by the handful. It showed him passing these around to all of his advisors and cabinet ministers. And they were looking at each other, well, I guess we should eat jelly beans if the president does it. Now, what are jelly beans? Sugar, chemical additives. It's a totally synthetic, artificial thing. And yet this great politician lacked the understanding of how that kind of daily consumption will come back to haunt you. And again, this is why I always appreciated the insight into life that I encountered with Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Where does Alzheimer's come from? Well, we should understand that because it is increasing as rapidly as diabetes. It is known that a chronically elevated insulin level promotes the development of Alzheimer's. Now, how do you get a chronically elevated insulin level? Eat jelly beans every day. Eat chocolate every day. Eat ice cream every day. Eat sugar every day. There was a powerful dictation by Sanat Kumara in the mid-90s in which he pointed out the effects of chocolate and sugar on the human consciousness and how that holds us back from spiritual development. That was why my interest and my enthusiasm for the teachings of the Ascended Masters was renewed again and again, because I've spent my life telling people about how to eat well, and to get support at that level was great. Now, I don't want to give the impression that food is the only thing that affects our physical health. There are several factors. Being surrounded by natural substances or textiles rather than synthetics, plastics, that's important. Amalgam fillings can affect our health. There are many effects on our health. But what comes to the center of this discussion is always food, because it is the most intimate interaction we have with our environment, and it affects the central nervous system. My first lecture at a summer conference was 1995, and there was a dictation by the unascended Master Babaji. I remember this dictation very well because he said, food is the basis of spiritual growth. Then he explained what he meant by that. Food will determine the function of your central nervous system. Your central nervous system is your connection between body and mind, obviously. That's what makes human beings so unique. We can think abstractly. But what happens if we have strong blood sugar fluctuations? How clearly can we think if we have low blood sugar? Some people even get the shakes because their blood sugar drops so low. So Babaji stated very clearly that we should eat well every day to increase the clarity of our nervous system so that we are capable of, first of all, self-discipline. Because eating well requires self-discipline. You don't just eat spontaneously whatever feels good at the moment. And one thing that always impressed me with the Chilas of the Summit Lighthouse was that they were masters of self-discipline, except with the food. But there was a desire to increase their self-discipline in this area, and I found a general, we could say, a lack of fear of the kitchen, which is what I find in the society in general. Because these are generally people who have very busy, active lives. They don't spend a lot of time lying around on the couch, and they roll their sleeves up and get into it. So the second part of my lecture today will be more of the details about what healthy food actually means. In any case, let's keep in mind what Babaji has told us, that the food affects our nervous system. The nervous system is our connection to higher realms of consciousness. If we eat phosphates, which are common additives in commercial processed food, it's more difficult to think clearly. Phosphates are documented as a disturbance to clear, harmonious thoughts. I just heard on the news that a lawyer has just been released from prison after 16 years for beating to death his 6-year-old stepdaughter. He was probably an average kind of person with no history of violence, but some people's minds will snap and they'll do things that they regret the rest of their lives. The Ascended Masters call this God control, of not letting yourself snap or losing the control. And food is an important part of that. The Taoists referred to the spirit of Wu Wei. Now, Wu Wei can be translated as don't disturb. Don't disturb. So what should we not disturb? The flow of the Tao. The flow of the Tao. In other words, the order of the universe, the divine order of the universe. So if someone would ask a Taoist master, what is the greatest secret of life? They would just say, Wu Wei. Don't disturb. I'll give you an example. If it's very cold weather and we eat cooling foods like ice cream or we drink orange juice, these cooling foods throw us out of balance. The body is trying to keep itself warm, trying to maintain that body temperature. That's part of health. So if we were in a winter situation here, we would think that warm stews, bean soups, etc., that kind of food supports the body's striving to maintain balance in a very cold surroundings. If we take cooling foods, we make the job more difficult. We're actually disturbing the body's attempts to keep itself in balance. Now, obviously, the Wu Wei is something that encompasses all levels of life, but because I'm talking about food today, I want to just use this as an example of how the spirit of Wu Wei should also be taken at our daily practical level. That we try to eat well to support what the body needs. A woman who is having hot flashes, this is heat. So she can then take the foods that are necessary to give her that cooling energy. High amounts of animal protein are very warming. And for some people in certain situations, it's going to be the right thing. But for others, it's the wrong thing. We try to develop our intuition to understand what's good for us and what isn't, and to try to support the body's striving to be healthy. Because we were given a great gift, that we were born into the life we were born into. We could have been born in Iraq, we could have been born in Somalia, with much more difficult circumstances and more concerned with daily survival than developing our consciousness. We belong to a select minority who have been given a wonderful gift to use this life to move forward in our spiritual development, and we owe it to our Creator to give that back as much as we can, helping others, living a long life. It's a bit like Dad giving us a new car when we graduate from the university. That he'll be very happy with us if we take good care of the car, we don't smash it, we don't get drunk and drive at high speeds, we drive it carefully, and he feels that this gift was warranted because we showed the responsibility. When we take the wrong foods, we damage this just like a car. And at all levels, not only the physical level. Let's think of smoking for a moment. I'm sure all of you are aware of the dangers of smoking, lung cancer, etc. But let's just think of the heart chakra for a moment. The heart chakra, which is the very center chakra of the human body. Now, every time you inhale this cigarette smoke, what are you doing? You have two lungs on each side of the heart. And each time you inhale, you surround the heart chakra with toxic smoke. So this is damaging you at a level that goes beyond just the development of cancer or emphysema. This is weakening your heart chakra. So it's no wonder that the Ascended Masters make repeated references to the healthy life if we're really going to move forward. There is, from the very basis, from the very beginning of life, a close connection between the digestive system and the nervous system. The nervous system develops from the head on the backbone of the embryo, the digestive system in the front. After about 30 days, the circulatory system is full and the heart starts beating. But this original connection between nervous system and digestive system remains the entire life. We all know that also. Basically, if we think of how do we feel when we fast, I'm sure many of you have fasted. What kind of feeling do you get when you fast? You feel that your nervous system is highly charged. You feel clear. Many religious traditions have some form of fasting as part of their spiritual practice, because fasting does accelerate the nervous system, and those who are focusing that nervous system energy on spiritual matters can move forward. Now let's think of the opposite. A Christmas feast, total indulgence, to the point where you feel you have to lean back, open your belt, and then now, what kind of mental state are you in? You feel you're now ready to discuss the meaning of life? Now, this is a time when you just want to sit back and just hope that this pressure in your stomach is reduced. So what we need to do is every day fast a little bit. Fast a little bit. That means we eat what's necessary to sustain life, but we don't indulge. And it especially means not eating big meals in the evening, because big meals in the evening slow us down. They create more acidity, and these big meals will make us less mentally clear. So before I go into the details of what we're talking about, I'd like to mention one more ascended master, beloved El Morya, who in the Harvest Conference of 1996, I remember, I was blessed to be able to attend many conferences. He spoke of the concept of yang mind. This I found fascinating because my whole background in natural food comes from the macrobiotic perspective. Macrobiotics is a special kind of natural food orientation. It's not only looking at food from a chemical point of view, minerals, vitamins, enzymes, it's also looking at food from an energetic point of view. So orange juice is not only a source of vitamin C, it's also something that cools the body very much and suppresses kidney function. Now, orange juice is extremely yin. Yin is the cooling energy. Yang is the heating energy. Yang is summer. Yin is winter. Yang is day. Yin is night. Yang is heat in the body. Yin is coldness in the body. Cold hands, cold feet. But it also has a meaning at the mental level and beyond. So what did El Morya mean by yang mind? Well, he stated it very clearly, as El Morya usually does. And that was that to go the path of the Bodhisattva, we must balance the forces of yin and yang. Yin is relaxation, the ability to be humorous and enjoy the lighter side of life. And yang is focus, self-discipline, concentration. El Morya stated that it is not only important to balance these two forces, but also to have a slight excess of yang, because we need a bit more self-discipline, concentration and focus than relaxation and good times. Now, what became interesting in this whole thing is that El Morya mentioned the macrobiotic way of eating to create yang mind. Now imagine how impressive that is for a macrobiotic teacher to hear. To say what I've been working with my whole life, well, my whole adult life, is something which increases our focus, concentration, and self-discipline for spiritual progress. So, let's look at some of the things that will block that. Extremely yin are things like sugar. So you'll notice in some of the prayers and calls that the Ascended Masters have given us that sugar is included with such obvious nasties as tobacco, alcohol. You know, this is quite amazing concerning that, sugar is just something that's on the shelf in the supermarket and we buy it and we put it in our pies and cakes, and whoever thought that this would be something negative. But I want to repeat something we heard in the presentation before, is that we don't have to become fanatic. That if there should be sugar in something that we get, there are ways of balancing that out because we understand yin and yang. That if we know that sugar is very yin and works against yang mind, then we can create that yang force again by supporting the opposite energy with the food. For example, having brown rice. Brown rice is the unpolished natural form of rice. The white rice is polished. The brown rice is a very centering food and gives a feeling of yang focus. I can remember back in 1970-71, that winter, as I had my first bowl of brown rice, I felt very focused. I had never felt that kind of energy before from food. In the mid-80s, Professor Fernstrom from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a leading technical university in the US, stated that it is becoming increasingly clear that brain chemistry and function can be influenced by a single meal. Isn't that interesting? Professor Fernstrom discovered that one meal is enough to influence our mental state. At MIT, work was done on this quite intensively, and in 1985, Dr. Judith Wertman, in connection with other researchers, published a book describing how food affects our thinking. The book is called Managing Your Mind and Mood Through Food. But unfortunately, we won't see many psychologists working at this level when they deal with schizophrenics or people with mental problems. It's known that a wheat allergy can cause schizophrenia. Or we can spend years of psychotherapy trying to find out where this all came from. Now, I don't want to make the assumption that mental disturbances are purely food-oriented. I lecture a lot in Europe, and Europeans are trained in attacking any weak points there may be there. So I always try to cover my back. In any case, the yang mindset is very important, and we can do that by food, by eating brown rice. Now, brown rice sometimes is not everyone's favorite because it tends to be a bit heavy and more difficult to digest than white rice. But if we soak the rice like 24 hours or even 8 hours if we're rushed, or if we add something acidic to it like lemon juice or fermented pickle juice, we can speed up that process of breaking down the phytic acid, which is in all grains and also the soybean. Phytic acid blocks the absorption of minerals, especially calcium, zinc, magnesium. Now, zinc is referred to as the intelligence mineral because zinc is so important for the function of the central nervous system. So if we eat a lot of whole grains, granolas and mueslis and whole grain breads, which have not been properly prepared, we will not get the full effect of healthy food because we can create a mineral deficiency. So we soak the grains, that breaks down the phytic acid, or if we eat bread, we sprout the grains, like we have Ezekiel bread, which is found in most of the health food shops, or we eat sourdough bread. But this is real sourdough, not fake sourdough, which you find sometimes in commercial bakeries. This breaks down the phytic acid, it makes the minerals available. So healthy food is important, but it's also important to understand the small details. And I just wanted to mention one more ascended master before I go on. I thought El Morya would be the last one, but I wanted to say something about Saint Germain. In his Ascension Day address of 1995, Saint Germain pointed out that people are becoming more and more clogged, and that he said it's getting more difficult for us and the hosts of the Lord to reach people. They just don't pick up the vibration anymore. Now, how are people becoming more clogged? Well, there are several possibilities. There's saturation with all kinds of negative energies going around at all levels. At the physical level, it is an overabundance of bad food. It makes the body hard. One of the things I do is when I meet people for personal counseling is I like to touch them, feel if their connective tissue is hard or pliable. And hardness is clogging. It shows an overacidic condition, an imbalanced condition. The lymph system doesn't flow properly. Now, there are different ways to deal with that. One is to get a good massage, a lymph massage, lymph drainage, Swedish massage, different ways you can massage those toxins out of the body. But even better is, don't eat the wrong things which creates that, like bad food, which is most of the things you'll find in a normal supermarket. When I go into a supermarket, there's not a lot I find there that I want to buy. So St. Germain pointed out that people are too clogged. We have to unclog our bodies. And if we develop the yang mind, which El Moria told us about, then we're able to attract the violet flame. The violet flame is very yin. If we look at the scale of the colors, we have infrared to ultraviolet. The color yellow is exactly in the middle. The Yellow Emperor, the classic of the Yellow Emperor, which is the basic book of Chinese traditional medicine, was called the Yellow Emperor because he was the emperor of the middle, the balance between the two. So the violet flame is very yin. And how are we going to attract the violet flame to us? By becoming the opposite. Opposites attract. That's what I learned from macrobiotics. Yin and yang attract. Male is yang, female is yin. There's an attraction. Ah. Now I understand everything. That's why we feel the attraction to the opposite sex. So, if I want to attract the opposite energy, then I want to be strong in that energy. So, the yang mind means not only do you have the capacity of self-discipline, but you also just energetically will attract that violet flame. Imagine drinking beer and then sitting down to do violet flame decrees. Seems kind of strange, doesn't it? We'll all go to the pub, and when we get back, we'll do decrees. Now, when you drink alcohol, your condition becomes very yin. It's expanded, it's not focused, it's not self-discipline. I'm sure one or two of you knows what I'm talking about. So we create the yang to attract the yin. Just like a man who wants to attract a woman will try to charge up his yang energy. If the man puts on jewelry and the things that women do, he won't create a lot of attraction to the opposite sex. So it's very simple. We create a yang condition in us. So we avoid not only beer and alcohol, but also sugar and chocolate and those things that Sanat Kumara told us to avoid. And what I found especially interesting, also synthetic sweeteners mentioned in dictations. Synthetic sweeteners, the scourge of the earth. NutraSweet, doesn't that sound harmless? NutraSweet. Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi. This stuff burns your brain. Aspartame, which is the correct name for NutraSweet, is a substance which kills neurons in the brain. It's interesting that Donald Rumsfeld, while he was the CEO of Searle Company, which sells aspartame, was able to push through the FDA objections and got it accepted in the US on a large scale. We've only had aspartame since 1980, but it's already now doing a lot of harm. And it creates exactly the opposite of what people think it does. Why do people take Diet Cokes and Diet Pepsi? First of all, they're basically hooked on the caffeine that's in these products, because caffeine is a very addictive substance. Listen to the lecture by Elizabeth Clare Prophet called The Death Spiral of Caffeine, inspired by Almoria. People are hooked on caffeine. It is estimated that 80% of our population of the US and other industrialized countries, 80% are addicted to caffeine. That means when you get up in the morning, you have to have a cup of coffee or black tea, or for those who get it from Coke or Pepsi, from those sources. Caffeine has a very strong effect on the central nervous system. It's a toxin in the plant to discourage insects from eating the beans, the coffee beans. So the insects stay away, and we should too. In any case, people want to lose weight. They don't want too many calories. So sugar's got calories, aspartame doesn't. So they take Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi thinking this will help them keep their weight down. But if you look at those in supermarkets who buy these products, you'll notice they tend to be the heavier weights. Now, if you look at what is allowed in the raising of livestock, you'll discover that synthetic sweeteners are used to fatten livestock. Isn't that interesting? How can synthetic sweeteners fatten livestock the same way they fatten people? You swallow this stuff, and the first sensation on your tongue is, this tastes very sweet. Now, a message is sent to the brain registering sweet. The body is definitely a divine miracle. Your body is so finely tuned that when taste sensation registers sweet, your pancreas starts producing insulin, because it knows all these carbohydrates are coming and your body wants to be ready for that. If the insulin first starts when it's there, it can become difficult to balance. So you swallow this stuff, but it's all an illusion. It's an illusion in your brain that it tastes sweet. So now you have this production of insulin, but it's not needed. Now, what does insulin do? It is the key to take blood sugar or glucose into the cells, because this is going to become the fuel for cells. So you have, say, an average blood sugar. Now comes a surge of insulin, your blood sugar drops, because that blood sugar is now pushed into the cells. Now, what happens when people's blood sugar drops? They get a craving for sweet or hunger sensation. So it's been shown in studies that those who take diet products, sugar substitutes, that they eat more sugar than those who don't, because they are constantly being pushed into a low blood sugar condition. So it's no wonder that the Ascended Masters have warned us not to take synthetic sweets. With this information, we can create a vibration which is yang. We will attract the violet flame. We will make a strong body which will hold the violet flame. The Ascended Masters have referred to the body as a vessel to hold the violet flame. And when this vessel is broken by neglect and poor diet and other unhealthy practices, we're not able to hold that flame. It leaks. So now that we understand the central importance of this, let's go into some more details. Now, as I mentioned before, my background is macrobiotic. I'm not really an orthodox macrobiotic person. Some of my worst enemies are macrobiotics. Because, as often is the case, there develop different directions in some kind of thinking, and those who don't think like you do can become the heretics. So I am admittedly a macrobiotic heretic, as you'll soon notice, because now I'm going to talk about the different kinds of diets that are around. And I want to look at those from a perspective of the macrobiotic philosophy, which is yin and yang, but also there is a basic assumption of macrobiotic philosophy, and that is the following, that wherever there is an advantage, there is always a disadvantage. It is called the front and back law. Wherever there's a front, there's a back. See, a front of discovering the path of the Ascended Masters is that you can make this your last incarnation. You can go to higher levels of vibration, which is quite a gift. But there's a price to this. Whereas other people will watch baseball games on TV, you are there plugging away, doing decrees, doing all those 8 steps that you just heard about. You don't. I know very few keepers of the flame who are bored with life, who don't have enough to do, who need to play chess to fill the day. Nothing against chess. So everything has a front and back. And this is important to keep this attitude, because whenever I discuss food with people, I always hear the non-macrobiotic perspective. That is, people only see the front and they don't see the back. So I'll give you an example. Nightshades are detrimental to health. What are the nightshades? Potatoes, tomatoes, or tomatoes as they say in the UK, bell peppers, and aubergine or eggplant, and tobacco, although we don't eat tobacco. But the solanine, which is in potatoes and tomatoes, solanine is related to a similar toxin called nicotine. Ever heard of nicotine? Solanine is an alkaloid toxin which has the toxicity of strychnine. It has the toxicity of strychnine. In the European Union, potatoes can only contain 20 milligrams of solanine per 100 grams of potatoes. The average potato contains 10 milligrams, so it's under the upper limit. But this is a toxin. So if I tell people, don't eat nightshades, I often hear, oh, but the tomatoes contain lycopene. Lycopene is this super antioxidant. How can you say something against tomatoes when they're so full of lycopene? Well, it's very easy. The tomato, like all other foods, has a front and a back. And so we'll just compare what speaks for the tomato and what speaks against it. Now, I found this especially interesting because recently, as I was traveling in tropical northern Australia, I stayed at a place called a backpackers where you can cook your own food. Now, I was the only person standing there in the kitchen who was over 30 years old. Everyone else was very young. Most people eat in restaurants. The young people who have no money, they cook their own food in this kitchen. And those who want to cook their own food because they don't like restaurant food that much. And there were 4 stoves, and every meal that was cooked, whenever I went into the kitchen, was, well, lunch and dinner, let's say, was full of tomatoes. It was the major ingredient. Now, tomatoes inflame joints. So if you have any kind of arthritic or rheumatoid problems, you're actually creating more problems for yourself by eating them. no matter how much lycopene they contain, because solanine is a toxin. From the blood type diet, we can also learn that the nightshades contain a substance called pan-hemagglutinin, which means it is a substance which has the ability to agglutinate or glue the blood of all 4 blood types. Now, the nightshades get their name because they grow during the night. Their growth impulses from the night. So in German, they're called Nachtschatten. Same word, it's nightshade in German. It's an international concept. Now, night, as we already know, is yin and day is yang. So what kind of energy do we create if we make nightshades our basic food? We create a yin. That's not yang mind. That's yin mind. People normally make a decision. You'll see this when you look at the restaurant menu. You get rice or you get potatoes. So I choose rice even if it is white rice, because as far as I'm concerned, white rice is a lot better than taking my dose of solanine in potatoes. So let's keep that in mind when we look at this. There's a front and a back to everything. So let's look very quickly at vegetarian food. Good place to start. Vegetarianism is generally often associated with spiritual practice. So what is the front, or the positive, the beneficial side of vegetarianism? First of all, these are people who have taken a step away from the conventional and have become conscious of what they eat. Most people don't even care. They don't read the ingredients that are on the label. They just don't care. If it tastes good, if it goes fast, that's all that matters. So vegetarians are already checking things out. They don't want to eat anything that contains meat. Now, there are different kinds of vegetarians. There are lacto-vegetarians, which mean that they eat lacto or milk products. There are lacto-ovo-vegetarians. They eat milk products and eggs. Those who eat fish are often considered to be vegetarians too. And for research purposes and medical research, nutritional research, those who eat meat only once a week can actually be included in the vegetarians. So it's very difficult to get any clear information when you try to do studies. Do vegetarians live longer? Well, vegetarians smoke less, drink less alcohol. It's very difficult to get clear picture here of what is going on. But one thing is sure, vegetarian has healthy sides to it. These people normally will be aware that sugar is bad, but vegetarian thinking doesn't exclude sugar. I remember reading once an ad by Rajneesh, the Indian guru who had a group in Oregon and later called himself Osho. Vegetarian food was the demand put on the followers of Rajneesh. And the ad I saw was, champagne is vegetarian. And of course what they wanted to say was, we're not just these health fanatics sitting there chewing our grated carrots and red beets. We get out and enjoy life. So we have to be careful with this vegetarian thing, because just the avoidance of meat does not necessarily mean it's healthy. So let's take a look at what the backside is of vegetarianism. First of all, one of the most important things that I learned since I lectured here in 95, 96, that is that we should avoid tofu. Now, tofu is a soy product which is a mainstay of vegetarian food because we all need protein. Tofu, as a soy product, contains a lot of phytic acid. That means it will deplete your minerals. And I have discovered that people who eat lots of tofu tend to a zinc deficiency. Phytic acid is very rough on zinc. Now, what was zinc? Zinc was the intelligence mineral. So if you do go vegetarian, make a detour around tofu, soy milk, soy cheese, soy this and soy that. There is one exception, and that is fermented soy. When soy is fermented, the phytic acid is broken down, the phytoestrogens are broken down. Now, what are phytoestrogens? Phyto means it's from plants, and we know what estrogens are, female hormones. Now, how many men sitting here would like to get their daily dose of female hormones? If we come back to the original idea of the attraction between yin and yang, I think we could all say that we men, that we're great admirers of the female form, but we wouldn't want to have one ourselves. When you ferment the soybean, those phytoestrogens are broken down. But the women that really get slammed are those who take phytoestrogens as a concentrate, as pill, as a so-called healthy alternative to HRT, hormone replacement therapy. So be careful of phytoestrogens. They're very potent thyroid inhibitors. Very potent thyroid inhibitors. Is this a cause of concern? Cause for concern? It should be, because it is estimated that about 40% of the entire population has a thyroid disturbance. 40%. And those who take a lot of soy will be constantly weakening their thyroid function. Now, weak thyroid is a cause of a lot of problems, and it's often not detected because a normal medical examination misses the vast majority of thyroid problems. So be careful of that soy as your alternative. When you take away the soy, then the question comes for vegetarians, what kind of protein are you going to eat? Because if you don't eat protein, your thyroid is really in trouble. I have had several cases of people, mostly women, who have been strict vegans. Now, vegans, hardcore vegans, refuse anything of animal origin. The real hardcore won't even wear leather shoes. What I've seen with these women is that their thyroid function shuts down totally because they get a double whammy. They have too little protein, and their protein is mainly soy. A low protein, high carbohydrate diet can in fact weaken thyroid. One of the books I found here when I was here in the 90s, which I appreciated was sold here in the bookstore at that time, was called Solved the Riddle of Illness by Dr. Steven Acuff. And it is an excellent book, one of the best on alternative healing, medical doctor, writing about the great work of Dr. Barnes, who was probably one of the greatest allopathic physicians, normal conventional doctors, in the history of medicine, and discovered that thyroid problems are behind a lot of mysterious illnesses which we can't figure out. So be careful of the soy if you want to save your thyroid function. So vegetarians have to be careful. Also, if you make milk one of your protein sources because you don't eat meat, the question is, does an overdose of cheese, cottage cheese, yogurt, and milk really make you healthy? My experience is that it does not. That milk is a major cause of illness. Now, if you had your own cow, and you go out and milk the cow, and you take the milk straight, there is some redeeming factor in the whole thing. But because most of us don't do that, we rely on pasteurized, homogenized milk. What is that? Pasteurized, homogenized milk? It's indigestible milk. It's indigestible. The enzyme phosphatase is in the milk because it's necessary for the calf to digest the milk. That's why Nature put it there. As we all know, pasteurization temperature is far above that necessary to destroy enzymes, which is 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That means you have a product devoid of enzymes, but needs enzymes to be digested. And this stuff is considered necessary for children's health. And all it does is create a lot of health problems. I have 4 daughters who, except for a couple of accident situations, never saw a doctor. Never. And this, I'm sure, is partly because they never got milk. So watch out for milk products as a source of your protein. Now let's take a look at raw food. Raw food is also popular. Raw food is obviously, with all those enzymes, is great. You know, we should all eat food the way nature gave it to us. You know, which animal cooks its food? You know, see how degenerate we are that we've come so far that we cook our food. We should eat it the way nature gave it to us. That means we'll have unlimited health. Now, obviously, there are heat-sensitive nutrients, enzymes, etc., which are destroyed by cooking. But there's also a backside to raw food, and that is that the food is more difficult to digest. It's more difficult to digest. We have cellulose in plant food, which is very tight. In a vegetable like carrots, it's extremely difficult for the digestive system to break that open. When you heat it, the cellulose breaks. When you eat raw carrots, you don't get a lot of the nutrients out of it. You do get some. My experience has shown that those who eat only raw food over the long period, I'm speaking of the majority now. There's always somebody who feels good with some kind of diet. The majority of people get digestive problems. They develop actually an alcohol problem. Because when you eat large amounts of raw food, this tends to ferment in the intestines. And just like you can ferment grapes and make wine, fermentation in the intestines creates alcohol. There are 3 different fermentation alcohols created, which then have to be detoxed by the liver just as if you were hitting the bottle. And it creates a weakness of the intestines. There's a tradition of intestinal health that comes from Vienna, Austria, developed by Dr. Franz Xaver Meyer. And he already, 100 years ago, figured out that people who eat only raw food tended to weaken their intestinal health. So it's tricky. There was a man in Germany, Helmut Wandmacher, who was traveling around the country telling people, eat only raw food, and if you can't understand this simple message, then you're probably going to have to get ill, and maybe then you'll understand it. Then in 1990, he was going to lecture to a group about this size. He walked up on the stage, and he passed out. The ambulance was called. He was carried away on a stretcher. Now imagine if today I had walked up here on the stage to tell you about healthy food. I collapsed. You see the ambulance orderlies carrying me out. They discovered this man had an acute protein deficiency. Now, he knew enough about food to know that he needs protein. How did he get a protein deficiency? He only looked at the front side of raw food and not the back side. You see, plants try to protect themselves from being eaten. Some of them are masters of survival. Animals can run, they have claws or thick shells or something. Animals can some way protect themselves. Plants just stand there or lie there. So what they do is say, I'm going to make you regret that you ate me. So one of Helmut Wandmacher's favorite foods was raw peas right out of the garden. You know, open up those pods and just eat those peas. Now, if you eat a few peas out of the garden, that's not going to be a problem. But if you eat them as part of your meal, there are very potent protease inhibitors in peas. That means they block your protein digestion. They make it impossible for you to utilize the protein in the food you ate. They're going to punish you. So he was eating protein but not digesting it. Now, if he had just put some of this harmful, damaging heat on these peas, the protease inhibitors are broken down, and now you can eat those peas without any loss of protein utilization. But he was so ideologically locked into this way of thinking that he just ignored those things. So he was forced by the order of the universe to reconsider his position. So let's take a look at the blood type diet. Now, blood type diet has been a very interesting thing. It hit the street about 1997, became very popular in 98, and even still today has left an impression on a lot of people. The blood type diet is considered to be one of the most influential influences on the discussion of food in the last 50 years. The book has been translated in almost 60 languages. The books. So what is the advantage of the blood type diet? Eat right for your type and live right for your type. Well, the first obvious advantage is here we have a type of food that is individually adjusted because we have 4 blood types. So there are 4 different ways of eating. This is a departure from the idea that we should all eat raw food. We should all be vegetarian. We should all have long hair. We should all wear black clothes. You know, just everybody likes to express himself individually, and it's no different with the food. So this is great. And some of the information is also scientifically well-founded. He speaks of lectins. And I'm sure many of you have already read this, so I won't belabor the point. If you find the subject interesting, check out his book. Lectin, I spelled it like German. I'll change it to English here. I actually lecture more in German countries than I do in English speaking. So lectin is a protein substance which hooks into blood cells, tissue in the body, and the lectins have the ability to hook into certain blood cells and tissue and not others. Now, the subject of lectins is a scientific fact, and no lectinologist has ever criticized the work done by Dr. D'Adamo, as far as I know. I've tried to keep up on this subject. I've seen no criticism by lectinologists. Sounds like an exciting profession, doesn't it? So you study how these proteins affect the body. And this is quite interesting because I have read many criticisms of the blood type diet, that his description of how the blood types developed is not correct. But if you really want to knock down the blood type diet, you would just do the following. He says that when you eat food that is not proper for your blood type, this raises your indican level. Indican is a marker in urine of your bowel toxicity. In other words, the rotting processes going on in your intestines. This is a natural science examination. It's based on science. It's based on biochemistry. And he points out that on the scale of 0 to 4, that 3 to 4 is considered you're in trouble. Your intestines are in big trouble. 0 to 1, no problem. He states that the average patient who comes to him, he's a naturopathic physician, the average patient has 2.5. Now 2 is in the middle. 2.5 is considered to be a burden on your intestinal health. He states that within 2 weeks, after 2 weeks of doing the blood type diet, your indican level will be below 1, which is good. Now I have twice done an indican check, and my indican level was 0. So what would you say is the likelihood that I someday might get bowel cancer, intestinal cancer, colon cancer? Pretty close to 0. Somewhere between 0 and very improbable. Now, if yours is between 3 and 4, then you might be part of the 6% of Americans who die every year of colon cancer. Now, I have checked this with people and seen that this system really works, that your indican level drops to below 1 when you adjust to the blood type diet. It's like, wow, at last we have found the answer here. Let's all eat according to the blood type diet. Then comes the backside. He mixes 2 elements together. The first is scientific fact. Lectins, indican, there's no argument with that. Then he includes his own speculation. He writes, for example, that everyone should avoid coconut oil because coconut oil is mainly saturated fat and has no or has very little nutritional value. Has very little nutritional value. Wrong, totally. First of all, coconut oil is a very healthy oil. And I think the most important thing that I have learned since I was here last is the importance of coconut oil for health. But I get regularly emails from people telling me, I heard your lecture about coconut oil being good, but I'm doing the blood type diet and I have blood type, and I'm not supposed to have coconut oil. Well, if you read the book, you'll see that nobody is supposed to have coconut oil because it has nothing to do with blood type. He's not basing this suggestion or recommendation on blood type. He's basing it on his mistaken idea that saturated fat is bad. Saturated fat is good. But if we have been hearing for 20 or 30 years constantly that saturated fat is bad, then we probably believe it. He unfortunately has made a serious error. Coconut oil I have found to be very health-giving. Coconut oil contains lauric acid. Lauric acid is a medium-chain fatty acid which breaks down rapidly. It helps increase energy levels in the body and increases metabolism. It's good for the thyroid gland. It's good for overweight people. Now, 26% of the American population is now obese. Not just overweight, obese. Obesity is a pre-diabetic condition. No wonder they're telling us that 1/3 of the country will be diabetic in 45 years. And if people have heard about how bad fat is and saturated fat, then they will prefer the low-fat Diet Coke approach to weight loss. And that is a loser from the beginning. So he supports that kind of craziness by telling people to avoid exactly the fatty acid which they need for health. Not only overweight people, but everyone, because lauric acid is also antimicrobial. What does that mean, antimicrobial? It means it kills viruses, it kills bacteria, it kills fungus. Imagine that. Who would want to avoid something like that? I make a point of eating as much coconut oil as I can get my hands on. Sometimes I teach cooking courses, and when people see that I use 10 times as much oil as they do, they're shocked. But when you understand that coconut oil is good for you, you don't have to scrimp. You don't have to cut back on the amount. The more the merrier. basically. It satiates, within reason, of course. It satiates. It means you're not going to be out snacking chocolate, cookies, such things. I'm sure none of you do this, but I'm sure you know people who do. or you've heard about them. Now, what's really bad are the polyunsaturates. The polyunsaturates, those oils that are supposed to be good for us, those that make up margarine and are used in most of the cooking oils. Those are bad. Canola oil is bad, but coconut is good. When I switched to coconut oil many years ago, I experienced something very interesting. I have not even had a cold since I did that. Not even a cold. So my own personal experience has confirmed that coconut oil is very good. So be careful of the blood type diet. Then let's look at blood type A. Poor blood type A. Boy, now blood type A is about 40% of the American population. It's one of the two major blood types. But blood type A really gets the bad information from the blood type diet. You're supposed to drink coffee. It's not just that it's okay, you're supposed to. Like if you don't drink coffee, get into it. You say, wait a minute. Now, have I understood this right? Now, caffeine blocks the absorption of calcium. Osteoporosis is now at epidemic proportions. And I want to recommend everyone with type A and AB to drink coffee. Yes, it's very simple. I'll explain it to you. Type A's and AB's tend to have too little stomach acid, which is true. When you drink coffee, it creates a surge of stomach acid. You have thus solved the problem. So type B's and O's, who already have a lot of stomach acid, they're not supposed to have coffee because that's the way you can get an ulcer, by creating more stomach acid where there already is enough. I just can't believe that I'm going to be healthier by consuming caffeine, which is a neurotoxin. But it even gets worse for type A's. They're supposed to eat lots of tofu and soy milk. Now, the tofu contains phytic acid. That on top of the caffeine, boy, this person is really in for trouble. Now, I've talked to many people with type A's who have told me that when they try to eat lots of tofu, drink soy milk, they notice, I don't digest this well. But you don't have to make that personal experience. Just walk into a supermarket and go to the dog food section. Look at those big, this size bags where the print is really big. You can't miss it. It says, easy to digest, contains no soy. Isn't that interesting? Now, blood type B doesn't get off much better because they're supposed to take lots of cow's milk, because the antigen structure of blood type B cells is identical to cow's milk protein structures. So therefore, his conclusion is, take cow's milk, take cottage cheese, all of these things. Now, I know people with blood type B who have tried this. After eating a milk-free program a longer time, have been able to overcome allergies, asthma, autoimmune illnesses, improve the development of autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. And then a nasty surprise. They start taking these cow's milk products, and within a short time, they have their allergies back. The asthma comes on again. So you have to pick and choose with the blood type diet. So be careful of that one. But check it out if you don't know it, because it does have some interesting aspects. Then let's take a quick look at the Atkins diet, because no discussion of food would be complete without looking at Atkins. Have you read that in the last year, the consumption of bread in the U.S. has dropped by 40%? Now that is really making an impression. Low carb is the buzzword of our time. Low carb. Now there are obvious advantages to the low carb approach, which has been stylized by Atkins, Dr. Atkins. First of all, the positive thing, Dr. Atkins made a great contribution to more understanding of food and health. Whereas there was an overemphasis of carbohydrate before Dr. Atkins, there is now an adjustment to understanding we can eat too many carbohydrates. What are carbohydrates? Potatoes, pasta, bread, rice. That's all carbohydrate. Sweet vegetables, carrots, parsnips. So he said we have to be careful not to eat too much of that and eat more protein and fat. Now there's nothing wrong with that, basically, as long as you don't overdo it. You see, what I can establish as a pattern in this whole discussion of food is that people come up with a good idea, but they carry it to an absurd extreme. So the blood type diet is interesting, but it gets carried to an absurd extreme. Raw food, there's something definitely positive about raw food, but it goes to the extreme. Vegetarian. So with Atkins, we have the same problem. Atkins shows us how we can reduce this chronically elevated insulin level. I already mentioned it as one of the factors they have discovered in the development of Alzheimer's. Now, Alzheimer's is not a genetic problem, as is usually said. Genetics is blamed on cancer, Alzheimer, and it's a great way to explain things because we are not held responsible for our problems. We just got bad genes from our parents. We didn't make any mistakes. We didn't consume any bad things. Jelly beans are okay. But it's just we had bad cards when they dealt the deck of genes. Well, the chronically elevated insulin level is proving itself more and more to be a cause of many health problems. Everything from diabetes to male pattern baldness. And the way you get your insulin levels in balance is to not overdo carbohydrates, because obviously an insulin reaction is pre-programmed when we take fast carbohydrates or one-sided carbohydrates. So he pointed out that when we take protein, which can be meat, eggs, fish, that this slows down the blood sugar rise and also the insulin response. So it's very wise to include protein. I recommend always to people, when you eat any meal, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, that you always include some protein. Now this doesn't have to be animal protein. Beans are protein, although that can be discussed. In the zone diet, beans don't have enough protein to be called protein. In my experience, they contain enough protein to be called protein. So it can be animal or plant quality protein, but the protein slows down the blood sugar reaction and slows down the insulin response. I have seen many people recover from a strict macrobiotic diet, which means high carb and very little protein or oil, by increasing the amount of oil and protein they eat. When you increase protein, it's very important to increase oil too, because high protein with not the increasing oil will tend to bring out that toxic side of high protein, which is an acid-forming response. As I'm sure most of you are aware, protein metabolizes acidic. So one of the biggest weaknesses, however, of the Atkins program was that he did not consider the quality of food. For Atkins, it doesn't matter. Chicken is chicken. It doesn't matter if this chicken is pumped full of estrogens. There we are, guys. Back to the estrogens. So this normal supermarket style chicken, which is full of estrogens, or we have an alternative, which is estrogen free and antibiotic-free raising of poultry. He didn't think so much about this quality question. So it's just get that protein in there. Now, one of the problems you can get with this is that if you have weak kidneys, high protein diets create problems. If some of you listened to my lecture in 1996 here at the summer conference, I mentioned the work of Dr. Walter Kempner, who in 1946 was able to cure a third of his kidney patients by putting them on a low protein diet. So one of the most important things to keep in mind in this is that the food we need is very individual. We can get insight by reading different programs, talking to people, but in the end, it is really a question of your own personal experience and your own personal needs to discover what food is right for you. I want to look at the macrobiotic food here at the end of this comparison because macrobiotics is also an interesting kind of food. Now, macrobiotics basically means that you're looking at the energetics of food. If it's cold, you don't eat cooling foods. If it's hot, you don't eat heating foods. It means balancing yin and yang. And so that's different wherever you are. If you spend the winter in Montana or the summer in Arizona, you have different environments which require adjustments. It's not just a matter of eating protein, fat, and carbohydrate. So the macrobiotic program is at many levels. It's biochemical and it is energetic. So it gives us unique possibilities of finding that individual mixture that we need. And it still impresses me today the way we can creatively work with this program. I have seen people recover from illnesses where they had been declared incurable, people who have lost large amounts of weight in a short time. I mean short time like 1 year, losing 35 kilos, which is like over 80 pounds in 1 year, is a pretty good feat. The body adjusts to that. People have been able to do that with this program. But it has a backside like all food programs. The backside is that it developed from an original idea of balancing food, for example, heating animal protein with cooling green leafy vegetables. Let's say kale. Kale, or bok choy as a steamed green vegetable, has a cooling effect. Or eating a salad. Salads are cooling. Eating animal protein is heating. So we try to keep a balance. So the question is it allowed for macrobiotic people to eat an egg? This is a burning question. It's an important question. We'd say, well, let's look at the possibilities. I might eat fried eggs with bacon and toast. That's typical breakfast. There's no balance in that kind of meal. The bacon is very yang, it's heating, compact stuff. The eggs too. Won't even talk about the white bread toast. But let's look at another possibility. What do I do when I eat eggs? I make a miso soup. Now, miso is made with soybean paste, but it's fermented for 2.5 years. The phytoestrogens are gone, the phytic acid is gone, the protease inhibitors are gone, but the goodness of the soybean is still there. So it's maybe a teaspoon of that as a seasoning in my vegetable soup. Now, I eat this for breakfast because I feel it gives me the best balance. It's very alkalizing. When we wake up in the morning, we generally tend to be more acidic, and something alkaline is good for us. And what I do is I put a raw egg into the soup at the end when it's no longer boiling, so it's just hot liquid. The looser this egg remains, the easier it is to digest. Hard-boiled egg, harder to digest. Fried eggs, even harder. A raw egg into the soup, like you see in Chinese cooking, putting a raw egg in the soup. Now this is very balanced because the vegetables balance the egg. So for me, this is creative yin-yang cooking. But then I meet, here comes the backside of this, I meet an orthodox, conventional macrobiotic person who says, this is not macrobiotic food because macrobiotic people shouldn't eat eggs. Why shouldn't they? Because they're too yang. They're too compact and too heat-producing. Well, maybe. But the basic slogan of macrobiotics is non credo. Non credo means I don't believe. So you just don't believe things. You sense things, you experience things, you draw your own conclusions. My interest in the teachings of the Ascended Masters was not just because of an intellectual decision that this sounds interesting, but at other levels I could feel the presence of the Ascended Masters, and it made me very curious. So I was very open to that. But I didn't just believe, as I'm sure many of you also. You feel that power. And this is the way it should be with the yin and yang, that if you don't feel the yin-yang balance, then obviously you don't believe this. I believed it because I felt it immediately. I think that I have a God-given gift of sensitivity. I feel the effects of food, and that's why the first macrobiotic meal I ate over 30 years ago convinced me immediately that I wanted to find out more about this and to get into this. Just like the first time I watched in Stockholm, Sweden, a video lecture by Elizabeth Clare Prophet and a dictation by Mother Mary following that I immediately became interested. I must know more about this. It's a sensitivity. And I feel sorry for those who don't have that sensitivity because they miss a lot in life. Or if you have a European background, you can become overly cynical about everything. I have never found in the US or Australia that when I lecture about the benefits of miso, which is originally a Japanese product, but also there's the American Miso Company, Miso Master. A lot of miso is actually made in the US. It's just a fermented soybean. You can do it in Sacramento or Tokyo, it doesn't matter. But when I talk about the benefits of miso and seaweeds, now seaweeds are very good because they're very high in minerals. I have found that most people are lacking in minerals and we all need a small amount of seaweed. But I've had people say, you've been sent here by the Japanese food industry, haven't you? I'm on to you. Say, oh, you figured it out. I thought it was more subtle than that. So we have the possibility of using the macrobiotic idea of yin and yang, of which the masters have spoken. Balancing yin and yang, slightly yang mind. And yet we don't have to accept this package which has become known as the macrobiotic diet, which includes tofu, and is generally a vegan diet, which means it is extremely vegetarian with the exception of occasional fish. Fish is the allowed animal protein. Now there's some sense of that because fish is a very easily digested and healthy kind of animal food as long as it is not polluted. Now last year in November I flew from Sweden to Australia, and the last Swedish newspaper I read before I got on the airplane stated that every fish in the Baltic Sea now is contaminated with estrogen. Because the Baltic Sea is closed in to 98% by land and has very little outflow into the North Sea. And it has become so polluted that I would not want to eat any fish caught in the Baltic Sea. So we have to be a little more flexible in these things as we look at what is the proper food. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown here now on how I do my daily food. This may seem a little bizarre to some of you, or to many of you. But I'm sure that people who carry around Archangel Michael's sword, are used to being considered So I start the day with a miso soup. So I cut vegetables, and I saute these vegetables in olive oil, and not just a little olive oil. For myself, I probably put about the equivalent of 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I saute the onions because I like the sweet taste. Then I add other vegetables as I get them ready, especially the root vegetables like carrots or parsnips. I like to have something root-oriented or pumpkin, like a dense vegetable, as well as light vegetables. So one of my favorites is carrot, bok choy, or parsnip, broccoli, that kind of combination. Something that grows up and something that grows down. It's the yin and yang. Then I add miso to this, about a teaspoon of miso to taste. Depends on how much soup I'm making. And I do like to put an egg in the soup, especially if I want to do a lot that day. Egg is power kind of energy. If I have a lot of things to do and I want to have power. Then I eat some kind of grain. Now, the low-carb approach is okay, but I think that they overstate the case, because you really need to make a difference between sugar, bad carbohydrate, potatoes, bad carbohydrate, or brown rice, millet, oats, spelt. Those are whole grains, or carrots, high fiber, complex carbohydrates. So we differentiate between refined carbohydrates and complex unrefined carbohydrates. Now, one of my favorites is to put beans in the miso soup, because beans are easier to digest the earlier you eat them during the day. Beans, or pulses as they're also called, are easiest to digest at breakfast, still fairly digestible at lunch, tough and heavy to digest in the evening. So I like to put them in the soup. Bean soups are my favorite. Add an egg to that, and that's a power breakfast. I also like to have something raw, because raw food fits best at breakfast and lunch, but not the evening meal. Now, that doesn't mean we would never eat raw food in the evening, but it is not as easily digested in the evening. So I'd like to make a salad in the morning. So basically, I have a normal meal for breakfast. If I'm going to have a light meal, like some people would have cornflakes with milk, if you can imagine such a thing. I can't. It's a tough way to start the day. If I want to have a light meal, I would put it in the evening, because that's the time when the body is now shutting down for the evening. It's the quiet phase. This is not the time we need dense, energy-rich, calorie-rich food. But in the morning we need it because we want to go the whole day. Now, coconut oil is so satiating that most people who start with 1 or 2 tablespoons of this in their soup will not even think about food for at least 4 to 5 hours. You go the whole morning and suddenly it's noon and you've been working intensely. My best work time is always up until lunch. I always feel like I've got the most power then. And I never think about food until lunchtime. And sometimes it's 2 in the afternoon before I even feel any hunger. So I want to have the protein. Now, the protein choices are different. Sometimes I eat fish for breakfast. It may be fish leftovers from yesterday. I may put them in my soup. The soup is a great way to get rid of leftovers. You can make it many different ways. I would suggest you try the soup to see what you think. I worked in a medical clinic in Germany, in Kassel, Germany, from 1988 to 1993. There were about 60 patients that I was involved with, about a third of the clinic. People who had decided to eat this food. 99% of them thought the idea of having a soup for breakfast was bizarre, to say the least. I would say anywhere from 80 to 90% told me when they left that they were going to continue having this soup for breakfast because they felt so well with it. So I'd say just try it out and see what you think. So So I've got the salad. Now I'm going to give you one last tip here. That is, I mentioned before that raw food can be more difficult to digest, especially those who have a weak digestive system. And there is a way of making raw food more easily digestible, and that is that you press it. Now you can buy a little apparatus which comes from Japan. It's hard plastic. It has a plate that you can just adjust downward. You put cut vegetables into this, or if you don't have that, you just take a bowl, put the cut vegetables in there. Now you add salt. Now it's important you don't add normal table salt. Normal table salt is one of the most toxic substances you can put in your body. However, a good quality sea salt, or even better, Himalayan salt, which is very popular in Europe at the moment, also called Hansa salt or crystal salt. Putting this salt on there. Now you put a second bowl on top of this, assuming you don't have the apparatus, and then you stack books or a nice big rock or something with a lot of weight on top of that. Now the pressure plus the salt will drive the water out of the vegetables. This means that the cellulose will break. You may remember I mentioned one of the problems with raw food is the dense cellulose structure, which doesn't release, even if we chew that carrot 100 times. And if we press it with salt, it doesn't take a lot of salt. You can experiment. If a white mold forms on it, you know next time more salt. You press this, within hours you see the water rising. Now my three favorite vegetables to do this with are carrots, which I grate because they're so dense you don't get a lot of water if you cut slices. Cucumber, you get lots of water. You get so much water that it's best to cut it in half and remove all the seeds and that whole watery section in the middle. Then you'll get a moderate amount of water. And the next is radish, both white and red radish. Now don't do this with cabbage, because raw cabbage or shortly pressed cabbage contains a high amount of thyroid inhibitors, just like raw broccoli contains thyroid inhibitors. So some raw foods we should not take. Those foods are just waiting to punish us. If you do this pressing process a bit longer, to the point of becoming sour, like sauerkraut, leave it long term, then you succeed in breaking down these thyroid inhibitors. But coleslaw is a bad idea. So you press these vegetables. You can let them stand as long as you like. First, they're pressed and they're delicious, or you can let them stand longer and they gradually pickle. I have a production of this going on all the time. There's always I'm always pressing something. And I notice this gives me that balance in my food, because I like something raw at every meal, but in the evening I prefer not to eat totally raw food. So the pickles are high enzyme, easily digestible raw food. So I have to spend a certain amount of time doing that. But I haven't seen a doctor in over 30 years. And now next year I'll be 60 years old, and I plan to spend another 30 years not seeing doctors. So this food aspect is so basic to our life. Imagine the amount of energy and the potential that you can spend on positive things like striving for your ascension, rather than how am I going to deal with this asthma attack? You know, how many people feel inspired to do decrees when they can't breathe? So your physical condition will determine your ability to walk this spiritual path, and that's why the Ascended Masters have made so many references to good, healthy food. And not just generally. Because it's easy to say, eat healthy food, lots of fruit and vegetables, but in the specifics, like don't take aspartame, NutraSweet. That's a holistic approach to spirituality, which the Ascended Masters have given us in all of their dictations, that they repeat this message again and again. So when you've got this kind of a system, it works great. You find when you have protein, oil, and carbohydrate, all three in the meal, that you have much less sweet tooth, much less craving for sweets. Because when blood sugar drops, that's when the sweet cravings come. When you have balanced your blood sugar, you just don't crave sweet. See, I never crave sweet. And it's not a particularly great achievement, it's just that my blood sugar is pretty stable. And a lot of people fall there. They try to eat well and then they fall off the straight and narrow path because the food isn't really balanced. And because it's not balanced, the blood sugar drops, and then they will eat things they know are not good. I'm sure everyone in this room knows that sugar is bad. I'm sure no one would say, what, sugar is bad? I didn't know that. Everybody knows sugar is bad, but they still eat it. Why would people eat something that works against their health? Well, it's because low blood sugar overrides reason. Because if your blood sugar would continue to drop beyond where it is now, your lungs might stop breathing. And your body doesn't like that. So it will do anything to get that blood sugar up again, including making you crave all the wrong things. So get your blood sugar in order and you won't be so much hounded by these sweet cravings. Now there are great sweeteners. We recommend rice syrup. Rice syrup or rice malt. It's a grain-based sweetener. Looks like honey, but is not nearly as sweet. My experience in the clinic was that most patients needed 3 days to free themselves from the need of intense sweet taste. That after 3 days, they liked the moderate, mild sweet taste of rice syrup. The only time I ever use rice syrup is when I do Thai-style cooking. I like to do sweet, sour stir-fries. Thailand is a great place to learn some tasty dishes. And I like to use the lemon or lime together with the rice syrup. That gives a good sweet, sour taste. But you don't have to eat it by the spoonful. So sweet is there. Fruit is available. But be careful of fruits that are high in fruit sugar, like bananas. Over 30% fruit sugar. So the healthiest fruit I know is blueberries. But there are other good ones too. Apples, cherries. More moderate, temperate climate fruits are the most balanced. Don't eat fruit together with your meals. That creates indigestion, it creates gas, fermentation in your intestines. Eat moderate amounts of fruit. If you eat lots of fruit, it will work against you because the fruit acid doesn't break down if it gets into large amounts. And it will be stored in the body. You have that hardness again, which makes you clogged, which St. Germain said is the problem today. People getting clogged. Saturated, hydrogenated fats, too much fruit acid. There are several causes of that. So I hope that you now have a better understanding of how you can do the food. Keep an open mind, experiment, and try to really feel how food affects you. Thank you.